some of them started arguing with regards to the fact that you call yourself Israels, you call yourself Jews, you call yourself Christians. So how come people step on you? After all, the Bible says that when you're being slapped in one face, you turn the other one and then receive another one. So why are you fighting? Why do you decide to go that route? They attack you and then you want to go that route. Kindly help us demystify this argument.
Well, that is the misconception. The misconception is that most people who are in Israel are Christians. In fact, there are more Muslims in Israel, Israeli Muslims, or Muslim Israelis, than Christian Israelis. Why that may be what is in the doctrine of the Christians, the Christian Bible, is not what is in that of the Jewish. More than 70% of Israelis are Jewish. They practice Judaism, which is a different religion from Christianity. And so when those of us who are here, who are Christians, are only looking at it from the perspective of Christianity, we're not looking at it from the perspective of the Judaism. That is not what their own holy book tells them, that if somebody slaps you or one ear, you should tell the other ear and be slapped again.
I will begin this conversation taking our quote first from Voltaire, who is a versatile and prolific writer. Once said, "In the eyes of the people, the general who wins a battle has made no mistakes." That's what it is. It is what it is, like they say. My next one is from George Orwell, who is an English novelist, essayist, journalist, and critic. Once said, "War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength." And my last one for today is from Albert Einstein, German-born theoretical physicist who is widely held to be one of the greatest and most influential scientists of all time. He once said, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." Oh wow, we're already even thinking we don't pray World War III don't happen. Warm greetings and welcome to The Conversation. We are reaching you from Captain's television studio here in the nation's capital, Abuja. I am Annabel Orji. On the show today, we will be discussing Israel and Palestine, or Israel and Hamas war, taking updates with regards to that war. We thought that it was going to end when it started in 7th October 2023, but looks like it's still ongoing. It's still ongoing, definitely, and it will still continue for only God knows how long. Even when you look at the Russia-Ukraine war, you just begin to wonder, that war we thought was going to end at that time still continues even up until now. What exactly is going to happen? What is the UN doing in this regard? And what are the lessons that we need to learn? How far or how long will dialogue come? Or how far would any of these parties decide to cease fire so that we can tame the humanitarian loss, the casualties that are happening? Because like they say, in every war, in every casualties, women, children are always at the receptive end. So whatever you're doing, we'd like you to lay it aside as we observe 1 minute silence for the hundreds of people that have lost their lives during the Israel-Hamas war, or is it the Russia-Ukraine war, or maybe the wars happening, the coups happening in West African countries. It's really a pathetic situation, and we hope that this dialogue happens, ceasefire happens. Some people say it's not a quick fix, but we hope that it happens anytime soon. My guest on the show today is Captain Bishop Johnson, U.S. Army retired and also national strategist, military and defense strategist. He will be talking to us with regards to the Israel-Hamas war, the Russia-Ukraine war, and how we can get, even if it's not a quick fix, how can it be resolved anytime soon or maybe later. Welcome to this conversation. I am going to be your host. Welcome back. If you just joined us, this is The Conversation. We're reaching you from Captain's television studio here in the nation's capital, Abuja. Now we'll move straight to our conversation for today. And my guest is Captain Bishop Johnson, who is U.S. Army retired, and he's also a national defense and military strategist. It's great to have you on the show today, sir.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure being here again today. Long time.
Always a pleasure having you, though.
Thank you.
Great. Now, let's talk about, before we talk about Nigeria, let's go straight to the foreign scene and see what's happening with regards to the Israel-Hamas war. What are your thoughts with all that has happened since it started, even up until today? It started in one weekend, one evening, and then everyone thought that it would just end there. Same thing with the Russia-Ukraine war. We all thought that it would just end in that day or probably that weekend, but then it's still ongoing. What are your thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, this has been a very volatile region of the world, particularly Israel-Palestine. When that October 7th happened, I knew personally that it was not going to be a one-day thing. I knew it was not going to be a 2-day, 1-week thing, because there's always been precedents in those crises. These people will attack Israel. Israel will go back there, either they're sending message to them or this retribution, however you want to call it. But they want to make sure that, there's repercussion for whatever actions that are being carried out either by the Palestinians or, Hamas in this particular instance. So I know that it's going to be a while because Israel must exert some repercussion as a deterrence for these people not to come back and repeat the same thing. Unfortunately, it has always continued to repeat itself, over the years since 1948 that the state of Israel was established by the United Nations.
I hear you say that it has always continued that, so it's been a recurring incident, and so like you just said that you knew it was going to get up to this time and all, but then you hear some other persons, you hear the Israelis come out to say that we stand with the Israelis, and you hear the Palestinians come to say we stand with Palestinians, and then at some point it's almost looking like the Israelis are just trying to fight the Islams, and then it's looking more like a religious war. So why are we looking at it as a religious war, or is that what it is?
It's not completely a religious war. There is a mix of religion in it, quite well, but it's more like it's fight for territory. I will even look at it more as an ethnic problem than religious, because when you come to Israel, even though majority of them are Jewish, they still have Arabs, Arab Israelis.
Yes.
They still have Muslim Israelis. They still have Christian Israelis. If you go to the other side too, the Arab part of it, they still have Christians, even though majority of them are Muslims. So it's more of an ethnic fight over territory between the Jews and the Arabs, and not more of Jews and Muslims, because they have mix of those religions amongst those two ethnic groups.
Okay, so that if you say that it's more of ethnic, so and then I hear you say that it's actually been a long time coming. So why all of this time? Why now?
Well, it hasn't only been now. There's always been those skirmishes since 1948 till now. Israel has been fighting war with Arabs over those territory. There was a war in 1967, what they call the Six-Day War, in which Israel engaged with Syria, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan. In 1973 as well, there was also the Yom Kippur War, between Israel and his Arab neighbors. So there's been always, even before 1967, just a few months after Israel was established as a nation, as a state, there was war. And so there's always been that war between the Israelis and their Arab neighbors. And even after this incident that took place was actually 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War that was fought between Israelis and their Arab neighbors. That one took place October 6th, 1973. And this one now took place October 7th, 2023. And so that was more like the 50-year anniversary of that war. So that has always been a very volatile area. Those wars have always been going on. And even in the midst of the wars, there have been skirmishes of, Israel going to arrest people over in the West Bank or Gaza, for planning to carry out acts of terrorism against the Israelis. There have also been situations where the Palestinians have crossed the border, going to Israel, blow up themselves at bus stations and restaurants, killing Israelis. So there's always been that problem, in that area. And it doesn't seem like it's going to end anytime soon, because it's a very complicated situation that has gotten even more complicated over the years. Because if you allow a problem to continue to fester, the problem gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it becomes more difficult to solve the problem.
Oh, wow. So I hear some people say that this could be Third World War brewing. Do you see it that way?
It's looking more like that, but I don't see it happening. Because if you even look at some of the countries that have said, look, Israel has, a right to defend itself against the brutal attack, from Hamas. If you even look at their, recent posture, everybody said, look, yeah, Israel, you have the right to defend yourself. But even in the course of defending yourself, it must be done in such a way that, you respect international laws. Because in every war, there are laws that govern wars. In this particular instance now, it doesn't seem like Israel has carried out these operations in accordance with those laws as the way they're supposed to be, because there's a huge collateral damage in terms of the number of civilians that are involved in this crisis. Some of those countries, that support Israel are, they are dialing a different tone now. That we should look more at trying to reduce the number of casualties that are coming out of Israeli military operation in Gaza. Although some Arab nations too have also voiced their own concerns and willingness to escalate or expand the war, but I don't think at the end of the day that war is going to escalate the way people are looking at it, because nobody's going to benefit from if that war becomes a wider war in which great powers are drawn into it. So at the end of the day, I see the world reaching some kind of consensus that does not allow the situation to escalate any more than it has been.
How soon do you see this happening?
Diplomacy takes time. It takes a while. It's complicated. The problem is a complicated problem. This is a problem that has festered for decades, if not century. And so it's not going to be an overnight thing. These people have their conditions. The other people have their conditions. And in the midst of those conditions, they collide. There's always collusion in those conflicts, and it's those areas that those collusions do happen that makes the situation very difficult to solve. And so even though at the end of the day diplomacy will prevail, it's going to take a while to achieve that diplomacy.
Okay, so I hear you talk about Arabs. So now, how do you actually think that the Arab nations are they on the right track with regards to this war?
I think most people who are looking at this, like people that have views in this situation, are looking at it from what is happening right now. This is not a situation that started today. This situation has been going on and on and on and on. And those two people have two different positions. The Israelis are ready to coexist as a state alongside an Arab state, in this particular instance, Palestine, right? They're ready to coexist with them in peace and in harmony. It's the Arabs who do not want to coexist with the Israelis. They want 100% of the land or nothing. In 5 different occasions in the course of history, the Arabs have been given territory of their own to have their own state.
Okay.
And each of those occasions, they have rejected those offers because they don't want the existence of a Jewish state called Israel. And that is what is at the center of this problem.
Yeah.
So I don't think they're in the right direction. In fact, as a matter of fact, the initial offer that was made to the Arabs, Israel was just a small, tiny place, and the Jews accepted the place. I want to remain in that small place, so long as they have their own Jewish state, a place where they call their own home. Even with that, the Arabs refused. There was a time they were in control of East Jerusalem, control of the Gaza Strip, control of West Bank. They rejected all of those offers because they simply don't want existence of a state, a Jewish state in that area. And so long as they continue to stand in that extreme position, you can't achieve peace because Israel is not going anywhere. And so long as they continue to maintain that position, there won't be peace. And because the situation has been allowed to fester for a long period of time, a lot of things have happened. Families have lost loved ones, either through act of terrorism from Hamas or Fatah or Islamic Jihad, or as a consequence of Israeli retaliation because these people came over and carried out act of terror on them. So people have died. Families have lost loved ones. And their children have been indoctrinated to the point that they now hate each other. They teach them all kinds of stuff in their school curriculum to grow up hating the other people. And so that has made the situation much more difficult and much more complicated to solve. Because all those families that lost loved ones may grow up tomorrow and because of the hurt and the hate in them, perpetuate act of terror or something of that nature. And so it's a very complicated problem because it was allowed to fester for too long.
So I hear most people, I was reading on social media, and there's this argument that most people keep having, and then they say this war it's been there in the Bible, there's a prophecy around it, and then some of them started arguing with regards to the fact that you call yourself Israelis, you call yourself Jews, you call yourself Christians. So how come people step on you? After all, the Bible says that when you're being slapped in one face, you turn the other one and then receive another one. So why are you fighting? Why do you decide to go that route? They attack you and then you want to go that route. Kindly help us demystify this argument.
Well, that is the misconception. The misconception is that most people who are in Israel are Christians. In fact, there are more Muslims in Israel, Israeli Muslims, or Muslim Israelis, than Christian Israelis. Why that may be what is in the doctrine of the Christians, the Christian Bible, is not what is in that of the Jewish. More than 70% of Israelis are Jewish. They practice Judaism, which is a different religion from Christianity. And so when those of us who are here, who are Christians, are only looking at it from the perspective of Christianity, we're not looking at it from the perspective of the Judaism. That is not what their own holy book tells them, that if somebody slaps you or one ear, you should tell the other ear and be slapped again. It's not in their own holy book. This is only in the holy book of Christians. And Christians are very, very, very minute part of the population. In fact, of the 3 major religions in Israel, the Christians are the least in terms of population.
All right, so now let's talk about the ground threat or the ground invasion. And then some people say that's just a threat. So do you see, is it more than a threat when you talk about that ground attack?
From military perspective, you cannot win a war just from area bombardment.
Okay.
What area bombardment achieves for you, for those that have air force, big air force, strong air force, is you use area bombardment to degrade the capability of your opponent.
Okay.
If you want a decisive and conclusive war, the ground forces, we're going to have to end up going into that war, where they will go from door to door, building to building, neighborhood to neighborhood to clean it up. Now, from the objective of what the Israelis say they want to achieve, which is total eradication of Hamas, there's no way they can achieve total eradication of Hamas through only area bombardment. The foot soldiers, eventually, we're going to have to go in and do the heavy lifting of going from door to door, building to building, neighborhood to neighborhood, street to street, to clean it up. So, yeah, the grand invasion is imminent, but it's not inevitable.
Oh.
It's not inevitable. That's my own assessment. It's not inevitable because we've talked about diplomacy that may be going on behind the scenes. If the diplomacy get to a point where there is some kind of agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians because of the international pressure on both parties, and they reach an agreement, I don't see them, carrying out that grand invasion. It's only when that agreement is not reached, or the Israelis want to ensure that they carry out their originally stated goal of ensuring that Hamas is totally eradicated. In that instance, then they must have to use ground forces to do that, because area bombardment cannot, give them, help them to achieve that stated goal of eradication of Hamas.
I hear you keep saying, talking about the total eradication of Hamas. But then you also talked about that in every war, there's a law. So now, if you also say that in every war there's a law, there's also the human rights violations and all, where your right starts, that's where the other person's rights stop, and then being taken to the International Criminal Court and all of that. Is it going to affect that total eradication of Hamas?
Well, even with what is going on right now, there are, violation of international laws, right? First and foremost, if Hamas violated international law from what it did on 7th of October. But the thing is that Hamas is not a state. In fact, Hamas is a terrorist organization from the designation of various countries, right? Even though Hamas is the government in charge of governance in Gaza. They don't play by the book. They don't play by the rule. But Israel is required to play by the rule. But I can tell you that those international laws have been violated in so many occasions. But because of the countries that are involved, nothing happens. If you look at what is happening in Ukraine right now, between the Russians and the Ukrainians, you can see that a lot of international laws have been broken. There have been crimes that have been committed in the course of the prosecution of that war. But because of countries that are involved, these are the most powerful countries in the world, it gets swept under the carpet. And that is what is going to happen with this one. This is not the first time there has been huge collateral damage as a result of Israeli operation in Palestine. Nothing happens because it's going to go to the United Nations. And if it gets to the United Nations, U.S. is a veto within, has the veto within power in the United Nations. It's going to veto whatever resolution that is brought to the United Nations. And so they're not going to get to anywhere, Also, we must understand that as much as technologically advanced as Israel is, their armed forces, by using precision-guided weapons, just to ensure that your operations are surgical, you are only targeting, areas that you identify as threats. you have to understand that the modus operandi of Hamas has always been to use civilians as shield. So they put military capabilities in civilian areas,
Okay.
like hospitals, schools, and all those kind of places. And the moment there is presence of military capability in a place, whether it's a place of worship or education, whatever, there are places that are usually protected places. But because of presence of military capabilities in those kind of places, those places have lost that, automatically they lose that protection. They become military targets instantaneously. And that is what is happening in this situation.
Okay.
Hamas is using civilian quarters, their apartments, their schools, and their mosques and hospitals to store their weapons. And those are the things that the Israeli military, the IDF, is going after. Because that is the only way they can eradicate Hamas, is by making sure that they degrade them by eliminating their military capabilities.
All right. So now, seeing the fact that world leaders battled for years to suppress the effect and the fear of Saddam Hussein from Sudan. So during that 11/11 saga, or that war. Now, do you actually think that that's where this terrorist group is tilting towards?
You mean Iraq? You mean you talk about 9/11?
9/11.
Okay, Al Qaeda.
Yes.
Do I think that this is where this one is?
That's what it's tilting towards. What happened then?
Al Qaeda has a much wider spread than Hamas. And Al Qaeda's objective is much more broad and wider than what Hamas is looking for. Hamas said they want a state for themselves, for the Palestine. But the only problem with that is that they don't want a two-state solution. They just want the state of Palestine, and they don't want an Israeli state to exist alongside them, right? So the short answer to your question is that I don't see it becoming a much more global phenomenon like that of Al Qaeda was. However, if the level of humanitarian situation that is going on in the Gaza Strip continues, and Israel loses all this international support that he has gotten from their allies, particularly Israeli allies, that he has a right to defend himself. And then you now have other countries, particularly Arab countries, Iran, Lebanon, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, maybe Turkey, get involved. The situation can escalate, can get out of control and become a much more broader conflict than what it is right now.
Oh, wow. So now, do you actually see that the head of the Israeli, some people say when you look at when the Russia-Ukraine war started, it looks as though the guy who was seen as the former comedian, that's the Ukraine president, would actually bow to the chief who is the Russian president. So do you see Netanyahu bending towards and say, okay, let's just let this lie? After all, because you have other powerful nations that are putting their efforts to see towards that diplomacy that you talked about.
Yeah, they will. I mean, sometimes they will have to achieve diplomacy to end the level of humanitarian crisis that has been erupting in that area. But as far as like bowing it, the Israelis have made they're not going anywhere. There will be a state of Israel, and I don't think that there will be any leader of Israel that will yield to anything other than ensuring the continued existence of a Jewish state of Israel. And so whether it's Netanyahu or any other person. Mind you, Netanyahu, this current government was one of the most hardline government Israel had ever seen in recent time. Far-right government. In fact, the government was even having problem with their citizens. They had that judicial reform that people were protesting almost on a daily basis. But what this attack from Hamas has done it has pretty much united the entire nation. Because if there's anything that unites them, is this the situation with the Palestinians and the Hamas
Oh,
in
okay.
particular. And so with that Hamas attack, the entire country have come together, and they're all rallying around their prime minister, who prior to that time was having domestic issues
With them.
at home with them. And so they've ended up forming a unity government where they brought in even opposition. And opposition agreed to join them for the sole purpose of dealing with the situation in the Gaza Strip with regards to Hamas.
Ah. All right, so clearly there's still more we can unbundle from this conversation with Captain Bishop Johnson, and we will definitely get right into it on the next segment of the show. I will see you after now. Join us again. How would you actually say that they have lost their power to mediate and create world peace?
So for me, I think that the problem of the UN is the structure of the UN. The UN as it stands right now needs reform. I don't think that one country, the vote of one country should override the vote of all the other countries that are members of the United Nations. That is the problem of the UN. We need to get rid of countries within veto power. Since UN advocates for democracy, is it not government of the majority? Is it not majority that carries the day? Even though the minority will have their say, but the majority will have their way. So UN is advocating for democracy in their member nations. But even within that UN, there is no democracy. Because you can't say that there's democracy in the UN when just one country, the vote of one country overrides the vote of every other person combined. And so I personally think that Nigeria is not at the right place to be able to be intervening in what is happening in those other countries.
Okay.
You know, because even look at Ukraine, even with the war going on in Ukraine, they're having power supply almost 24 hours. Their hospitals are still functioning. Their fire services are still working well. Their ref system is operating. As the Russians are destroying one sector, they are putting them back. Here we are. We are not in a major war of that magnitude. Yet some of these basic services are lacking in our country.
Welcome back. If you just joined us, this is The Conversation. We're reaching you from Captain's television studio here in the nation's capital, Abuja. If you just joined us, you've actually missed out on a whole lot, but then you can still join in the conversation, as my guest on the show today is Captain Bishop Johnson, U.S. Army retired and also national military and defense strategist. Okay, before we went on that break, we've actually touched on quite a number of things, but then with all that is happening, it means that it is, like you say, more casualties, more humanitarian casualties. You have more of people, more death, more of those who are into the business of producing or manufacturing or business of arms and ammunition. That's more money. That's more zeros to their accounts and all, more casualties. And how do we deal
with this situation? Is a complicated problem. If the problem is going to be solved, it would have been solved long time ago. But because of the very nature of this problem, that's why there is no solution to it. It's difficult.
So it just means that in one part of the world, in one part of it, some people are dying. Some people, women and children who are always at the receiving end. You have more refugees, more refugee camp, more IDPs, and more of that. But on the other end, some people are cashing out.
Yeah, I mean, in every situation, there are those who are going to benefit from the situation. And there are those who are going to be, negatively impacted by the situation. Yeah, those in the defense industry who manufacture weapons and military equipment, hardwares it's more business for them. It's not that they want it, but that is the situation that we're in right now. And so people will try to arm themselves. It's not the fault of those who are involved in a production of military and defense equipment. It's just that is the reality on ground. You saw that the U.S., as soon as the problem started, the first thing U.S. did was to come and resupply the Israelis. Already, the U.S. has a stockpile of, ammunition in Israel, and that stockpile can never go below 50%, without being restocked. So the U.S. had to make sure that the Israelis have whatever they need in case the war, escalates and becomes a regional problem, so that they will be able to have enough to defend themselves. Unfortunately, there will be collateral damage. Innocent people will die. That is why war is not always the best option. The best option has always been dialogue, diplomacy.
Sorry as a burden, but I need you to reiterate that and then make more mention of it, because remember during that election in Nigeria, a lot of people are saying, if it has to be a war, let's go to war. Like, they don't even understand the meaning of war.
Those who are asking for war are those who have never experienced war. People who have experienced war do not want it. They don't want. It's not an experience that they want to have more than once. So I don't think anybody should be advocating for war. War is always the last resort. If all means are failed, then that is when the military option or war options becomes a viable option. But if a situation can be resolved through dialogue and diplomacy, that is the best approach. Because where there is dialogue and diplomacy, you're not going to have the level of humanitarian catastrophe that is unfolding in the Gaza Strip. You're not going to have that. And so when you have, those kind of humanitarian situation, it brings untold hardship, to the people concerned. There is nowhere there will be war that they won't have collateral damage. There will always be collateral damage. People are going to die. And most people that die are innocent people that are not even connected to what we are talking about. And so that's why war shouldn't be the first option. It should always be the last resort when all other means or options have failed.
Okay, so now with regards to the dialogue, how much would you say the UN or the world power their impact has shown in all of this? How would you actually say that they have lost their power to mediate and create world peace?
The UN as an organization, in the past, let's understand, the UN was founded because we do not want a repeat of the First and Second World War. So that was why the UN was created. And from the history from the creation of the UN to now, there has been places and instances where the UN has made serious effort to prevent conflict. They've had UN observer or peacekeeping forces in different places for the sole purposes of ensuring that conflict don't prevail. Unfortunately, what happens is that when one of all these superpowers are involved, or one of all these countries with veto powers have interest, it makes the function of UN much more difficult for them, because anytime a resolution comes up on how UN can achieve peace, one of those countries will veto it. So for me, I think that the problem of the UN is the structure of the UN. The UN as it stands right now needs reform. I don't think that one country, the vote of one country should override the vote of all the other countries that are members of the United Nations. That is the problem of the UN. We need to get rid of countries within veto power. Since UN advocates for democracy is it not government of the majority? Is it not majority that carries the day? Even though the minority will have their say, but the majority will have their way. So UN is advocating for democracy in their member nations. But even within that UN, there is no democracy. Because you can't say that there's democracy in the UN when just one country, the vote of one country overrides the vote of every other person combined. And now, it's even more insulting. For example, Africa is 1 point something billion people in Africa. Africa has more member states in the UN than any other continent, about 54 of them. Yet, Africa does not have one representation in that permanent membership of the UN Security Council. And this is the most powerful body in that organization that takes decisions that affects the 1.something billion Africans. And so that's why I'm telling you that there is an internal issue with the structure of the UN. And until that is reformed, the UN will not be able to achieve some of the issues that you have raised. That is what is holding them back.
Ah, okay. All right, so because you talked about Africans, let's bring it back home to Nigeria. I hear some people say, oh, please, let's just be minding our own business. Let's major on our own major and minor on our own minor things. Some people say, please, we're still waging our own kind of war. Insecurity, insurgency, banditry, kidnapping. We still have war against corruption. Even if you look at the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, you still see that Ukraine, even inside the war, they are still fighting corruption. So that some people just say, please, let's just mind our own business and let's not put our mouth in their own matter. Should we mind our own business, Captain Bishop Johnson?
Well, as a nation, we don't live in isolation. We interact with other nations in various ways, whether politically, economically, or militarily. Because even in dealing with our own situations here in Nigeria, we still need help from other people. We have to go and buy weapons from other countries. There have been instances where we wanted to acquire weapons from certain countries and we were denied, acquiring those weapons. And so, in as much as, we want to concentrate on our domestic affairs, and I'm one of the proponents of those who believe that we should focus more on our own domestic issues because we have tons of it. When the coup in Niger took place, and by virtue of our president being the chairman of ECOWAS, and there was an ultimatum given to the coupists that they must restore constitutional order, otherwise the ECOWAS will militarily intervene. I was one of those vehemently opposed to it. And I opposed to it because of certain reasons. One of it being that, look, Niger is our neighboring country. Niger has been cooperating with Nigeria in its fight against Boko Haram and insurgency. There is a pipeline, a gas pipeline running through from Nigeria through Niger, which is an economic asset for us. We supply them power, which they pay for. And so that
at some point we say we're going to retrieve it.
They cut it.
The threat.
Yes. So because of those factors and the fact that we are all facing our own internal problems, there may not be coup in Nigeria, but Nigeria has problems. We have dwindling revenue. We have problem of insecurity. Banditry is a problem. There's insurgency. There is unknown government, oil theft, several problems that require resources for us to be able to tackle. And mind you, when you say ECOWAS is Nigeria. If Nigeria would have gone into that in Niger, most of the soldiers who will be there are going to be Nigerian soldiers. Most of the funding is going to come from Nigeria, even though we may get assistance from foreign countries, one or two of them, but most of the commitment is going to come from Nigeria. And so I personally think that Nigeria is not at the right place to be able to be intervening in what is happening in those other countries.
Okay.
Because even look at Ukraine, even with the war going on in Ukraine, they're having power supply. Almost 24 hours. Their hospitals are still functioning. Their fire services are still working well. Their rail system is operating. As the Russians are destroying one sector, they are putting them back. Here we are. We are not in a major war of that of that
magnitude.
Yet some of these basic services are lacking in our country. So we need to get our country to a point where we will take these basic services for granted. At that point, we can now say, okay, yes, we are stable, we have arrived, we can now begin to intervene in other countries. But we are not there yet. We haven't achieved that level. So therefore, our focus should be more on how do we take care of our own citizens, how do we take care of our own country to get to that level where we'll be able to become the big brother that we want to become.
But then, if looking at the fact that Nigeria is an heterogeneous society, we have over 500 languages, we have different religion, because I remember you said that this war is more of ethnicity than religion. So now, if we have these things, and then before now, you would actually say that the world is a small village, but now it looks like it's a small clan. If something that happened in Wuhan affected the whole world, if a disease affecting probably France, and before now we used to live with bed bugs. In fact, since 19 Brigidi, that's what Igbo people call it, change. So now all of a sudden it's back again, and then it has resurged and become something very serious. If the war in Russia-Ukraine affected wheat and then is affecting our bread prices, if also looking at the fact that all of this affected crude oil prices and then is affecting how much we buy our 1 liter of either fuel or the aviation fuel or diesel, if you look at all of this, should we really say, concern me?
No. If you listen to, when I started, I first said, look, we don't live in isolation. We interact with other countries economically, politically, and otherwise, right? There are challenges that are common challenges to everybody. You've mentioned the issue of COVID-19. That was a common challenge. And in those areas, all the nations of the world are expected to work together to deal with those situations, because those are situations that affect everybody. You talked about the spread of bed bugs, highly, insecticide-resistant bed bugs that are spreading. I saw the one on CNN about what is happening in Paris and stuff like that with respect to bed. You see, those common problems and those common challenges were the very reasons why the United Nations was bettered to be able to deal with those common problems, right? With the cooperation of member countries. In those kind of common problems, Nigeria cannot stand alone. Nigeria has to work together with all the other countries to deal with those kind of challenges. However, I personally will not support Nigeria to get involved in man-enabled problems. Problems that men created by themselves.
For themselves.
For themselves. For no reason other than selfish interest. For example, the war between the Russians and the Ukraine is unwarranted. It's needless. It has created more problems than it would ever solve. What is happening in Gaza and Israel was man-enabled, right? Unwarranted, unnecessary. Those kind of unwarranted and unnecessary crises, we shouldn't get ourselves involved in those. And we should always maintain neutrality. The war between Russia and Ukraine, African leaders mostly have maintained what I call strategic neutrality, apart from a few countries like South Africa, right? And South Africa, we can't, because South Africa backs a party in that conflict. Nigeria cannot, do the same thing, because our history is not the same with theirs. They have a different history from ours. If you look at ANC, African National Congress, at a point, in fact, most of their support was from Russia, when they were fighting the apartheid regime in South Africa, because they were designated as terrorist organization, even though they were saying that they were freedom fighters. In fact, it was only as recent as Barack Obama's administration that a ban was lifted on Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was declared a terrorist. So their history is different. They are free to back any party that they want to back. But for Nigeria, we have a different history. So we should look at for our own interests. We have so far maintained strategic neutrality in that conflict. And I think we should continue to maintain that strategic neutrality. The same thing with the one between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Because our challenges are numerous. And so are the solutions. The solutions are not going to come from one block or one region. The solutions are going to come from, plurality of, multiplicity of different regions. And so we should remain neutral so that, whatever solution we can find from the east, we'll go to the east and get that solution.
Okay.
Whatever solution we can get from the west, we'll go to the west and get that solution. But the moment we just back one party over the other, those other solutions that we're supposed to get from those other parties, we won't be able to get them.
All right, even as we begin to round up, because you talked about solutions, and then I recall even Russia and then some other countries asking them to cease fire. That's between the Israel and then Hamas. And then I'm saying even Russia is asking them to cease fire when you have your own to deal with. So now in all of this, two questions, and I'd like you to handle them in one breath. Do you actually see this ceasefire happening anytime soon? Even though I've heard you talk about dialogue, which would definitely take a long time. And then also seeing the fact that you have, you're looking at it from your expert giving expert advice with regards to wars and all, how would you actually advise these two parties, or both looking not only for Israel, Hamas, but also Russia, Ukraine, even the Russia that is asking them to cease fire and all? How would you actually advise them to ensure that this stops almost immediately, if not immediately, before it begins to escalate more than it is?
There's no way it can stop immediately. The reason why it can't stop immediately is because of interest. Now, Russia is in Ukraine because of Russian interest. And now you see them now saying that these people, there should be ceasefire. That's the hypocrisy that I'm talking about. And Russia is a veto-yielding power in the United Nations. And so any resolution you bring up against them, they will veto it. And so there's no quick fix to all these problems. There's no overnight solution. Unfortunately, those crises are going to go on for a while. Israel is hell-bent on eradicating Hamas. And so I don't know what anybody is going to tell them that's going to make them to soft pedal. Very few countries have influence over Israel, maybe United Nations. And it's sometimes not United States, but sometimes they disagree with the U.S. So the problem is going to continue for a while, unless Hamas releases those hostages that the Israelis have been demanding that they should release. And I don't see Hamas releasing those hostages, because
even though they're releasing like one or two,
they will be releasing them in a bit, just for them to know that, look, these people are still alive.
They're still alive.
We are holding them. So they will be releasing them in trenches, because that's the only leverage that they have right now, are those hostages. Israelis could have gone all out if those hostages were not taken. They're taking their time and carrying out their operation in a strategic and surgical manner, even though it's leading to a lot of collateral damages or casualties, because Hamas planted military assets in civilian areas. So, sorry, I don't want to be a messenger of bad news, but unfortunately, because of the complexity of some of all these problems, there are no quick overnight fixes to them. It will take a while.
All right, so if you're looking at lessons for Nigeria, I hear you say that Israel, they are taking their time to negotiate and then see how they can actually deal with this matter. And then I just remember, it just came to my mind, whenever they say that this kind of things happen in Nigeria, but then you have in the basket, you always have the bad egg in the basket. Probably in the military, you have when people are coming together and decide, what are we going to do to end insurgency? Probably you have one person who is the bad person that would go out, that will want to infiltrate whatever plan that they have. For us, what is the lesson that we should draw from that situation?
From having moles in the system.
Definitely.
Nigeria has learned a lot of lessons from having moles, because there have been, in most of in the last, at least in the last decade, I've been fighting this insurgency. One of the biggest problems that they've had in the fight against this insurgency have been, people giving up intelligence information. Disclosing to the enemy's, movement of troops, which has led to, casualties on the part of our military. And so I think that is a very hard lesson that Nigeria has learned in a very hard way. I don't think in terms of infiltration or giving out intelligence information in the conflict in Gaza Strip between the Palestinians and the Israelis, or what is happening in Ukraine between them and the Russians. There's anything that is coming out there in terms of giving up away military intelligence information that Nigerians had not experienced locally here on our own.
So you see, we don't have moles or rats in the system again.
There are. That's what I'm saying. There are moles in the system, and Nigeria has had to suffer as a consequence of those people, existing in the system. There's no country that those kind of people are. You don't have those kind of people. In every 12 there will be a Judas. You've seen even in the U.S. where people have leaked intelligence information. There was just a recent one of the Air Force private, that leaked classified information. So those people exist in every system, including Nigeria.
Captain Bishop Johnson, thank you so much for having this conversation with us. It's been a wonderful time having this talk with you.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. All right, viewers, that's where we end this conversation for today. We have been chatting with Captain Bishop Johnson, U.S. Army retired, and he's also a national defense and military strategist. It's been a wonderful time having this conversation. Like he said, it might not happen anytime. There's no quick fix, but how we wish that it will definitely happen anytime soon, because so many lives have gone and so many will still go. I will see you next time. Keep watching the conversation, because you never know who my next guest will be or what I will be discussing on next. My name is Annabel Orji. God bless you and yours, and God bless Nigeria.